So, Christian, gods and monsters, Jesus the devil, and the book of Revelation. Where have we been? Because remember, these are 10-lecture series, so we are now halfway through our course in gods and monsters. What have we done so far? We've seen how to make a god, religion and anthropomorphism. We've seen how to make a monster, the id and monster culture. We've seen how monsters and gods are given birth to, how they emerge from chaos in the theogony and the Enuma Elish. And last time we talked about the divine and monstrous feminine, some gods, goddesses, really just three, and the story of Medusa. So tonight, I thought I'd make it a little lighter and go with the book of Revelation. All right. First of all, believing is seeing, right? Believing is seeing. And, this was many years ago, but there's a literary critic who changed my life when I read it. His name is Stanley Fish. You may have seen his columns in New York Times and such on higher education, but he's a versatile scholar. He's a Milton scholar, a literary theory scholar, and a legal scholar, Stanley Fish. And again, I put these things in our online course, by the way, if you ever want to follow up, in our online discussion for this, if you ever want to follow up. Turns out he was teaching one summer, forget, that's CUNY or somewhere, and he had two classes back to back. The first one was a linguistics course. The second one was a course in 17th century religious poetry. Okay? He writes this on the board as the assignment for the linguistics course. If you studied linguistics, you may know these names. Jacobs Rosenbaum, for example, is a textbook in linguistics. Richard Oman. At the bottom is psychoanalytic reader-response linguist. Interesting stuff. Fish says he simply did not know if his last name had one N or two. When the 17th century religious poetry class came in afterwards, he left the assignment on the board with one change. Told him it was a newly discovered 17th century religious poem that he'd gotten an advanced copy of. It had been uncovered in some catacomb or something. And he thought he'd give them first crack at interpreting this 17th century religious poem, which we know is a linguistics assignment. Let me just let Fish speak here in his own words. The first student to speak pointed out that the poem was probably a hieroglyph, although he was not sure whether it was in the shape of a cross or an altar. The question was set aside as other students, following his lead, began to concentrate on individual words, interrupting each other with suggestions that came so quickly they seemed spontaneous. The first line of the poem received the most attention. Jacobs was explicated as a reference to Jacob's ladder, traditionally allegorized as a figure for the Christian ascent to heaven. In this poem, however, or so my students told me, the means of ascent is not a ladder, but a tree, a rose tree, or Rosenbaum. This was seen to be an obvious reference to the Virgin Mary, who was often characterized as a rose without thorns, itself an emblem of the Immaculate Conception. It at once posed the question, how is it that man can climb to heaven by means of a rose tree? And directed the reader to the inevitable answer. By the fruit of that tree, the fruit of Mary's womb, Jesus. Once this interpretation was established, it received support from and conferred significance on the word thorn, which could only be an allusion to the crown of thorns, a symbol of the trial suffered by Jesus and the price he paid to save us all. It was only a short step, really no step at all, from this insight to the recognition of leaven as a double reference, first to the tribe of Levi, whose priestly function Christ was the fulfillment of, and second to the unleavened bread carried by the children of Israel on their exodus from Egypt, the place of sin, and in response to the call of Moses, perhaps the most familiar of the Old Testament types of Christ. The final word of the poem was given at least 3 complementary readings. It could be omen, especially since so much of the poem is concerned with foreshadowing and prophecy. It could be, oh, man, since it's man's story as it intersects with the divine plan that is the poem's subject. And it could, of course, simply be amen, the proper conclusion to a poem celebrating the love and mercy shown by a God who gave his only begotten Son so that we may live. And graduate students being what they are, someone counted the letters, and no one was surprised when the most prominent letters in the poem are S-O-N. What does this mean? It means that believing is seeing. He told his students simply that they were, well, I shouldn't say simply because he spends a book unpacking it. He told his students that this was a poem. He was an expert in this type of poetry. They saw what they believed. Now, you already know where this is going, right? This is the history of the book of Revelation, where motivations are different, aren't they? In fact, we're going to talk about the motivations behind interpreting the book of Revelation. The motivations here are, well, we'll see, but they are not the simple joy of interpretation. I suppose it is for some people to unpack the book of Revelation, but for most interpreters throughout the history of this book, it has meant other things. First thing it meant was plague. So when plague came to a city, and it came to a lot of cities in the ancient era and in the medieval era, they were reminded of the plagues of Revelation, the many plagues. When smallpox first entered Europe, the book of Revelation was called to explain it. The year 1000 was a terrible year. It is said that people gathered in chapels, trembling throughout medieval Europe, as the priests did what could only be the final Mass, because it was 1000. And some of you may have been around in 2000, when we had similar concerns. I didn't put in here 2012 and the misunderstanding of the Mayan calendar. I could have put in so much, right? Do you know about the Beatles in the book of Revelation? Yeah?
Number 9?
Oh, no, it's much better than that. Let me just read it. Charles Manson found confirmation for the Beatles being the locusts of Revelation verses 7 through 9. 7 refers to the locusts having faces as were men's faces. But verse 8 says they had hair as the hair of women, which Manson took to be a reference to the Beatles' long hair. Even better, this is my favorite part. Verse 9 refers to the locusts as having breastplates of iron. In Manson's interpretation, the Beatles' breastplates were their electric guitars. Sorry, Les Paul. The horses they rode were dune buggies. Finally, Manson saw the fire and smoke and brimstone that came out of their mouths as, anybody want to guess?
Lyrics.
Thank you. Well done. The powerful lyrics to their songs, especially what album? The White Album. What other choice could there be? Manson also at times saw the Beatles as the four angels of verse 15. Russia. Now, certain things come full circle, but I remember as a boy, growing up a Southern Baptist, I don't know if any of you know this tradition, but we would have annual revivals. Like you planned it, which I didn't think now could happen, but yeah, we planned it. So we would bring in these guest preachers, basically, and there were people, I guess there still are, who just travel around to different churches and preach. And we had a man come every year repeatedly, and the church was filled because he knew the book of Revelation. He knew it well. And the book of Revelation was about Soviet Russia. And it was clear as day in 1970, whatever, that this was Russia. Gog and Magog, you can look it up. That's Russia. Now, maybe he was right in a different way as we live here in 2017, but around this time, and this evangelist was drawing off these two books, there was a man named Hal Lindsey who wrote one of the most popular books ever called The Late Great Planet Earth. A detailed account of the book of Revelation and how it was playing out now, being 1970 whatever. And then with the tremendous success of The Late Great Planet Earth, and before the Earth disappeared, he followed it with Satan is alive and well on planet Earth. Mega sales. I read it, scared the shit out of me, which was the point. You may know the Left Behind series. I've never read these, I've just read about them. These are two ministers, evangelical ministers who've made, I don't know how many books there are a lot, but it's about people who are left behind during the rapture. Do you know this term, the rapture? It's supposed to come out of the book of Revelation, where believers are raptured, they are lifted up out of the earth, and then literally hell breaks loose. These have been incredibly popular. Like I said, there's probably a dozen in the series. I may be wrong. There are movies. I think Nicolas Cage did one of these films. Point being, we love this story, right? It scares the hell out of us, but we love it, and we keep loving it and listening to it. Then, of course, the world was to end in 1994. Did you know this guy, Harold Camping? You ever heard that? You know, he's one in many, a line of many preachers who determined that it was 1994 when it was all going to end. Of course, it didn't end in 1994. This is his billboard. Judgment Day, May 21st, 2011. How'd you make it? So yeah, it didn't happen in 1994. And what do you do when your calculations are off for the apocalypse? You recalculate. That happens a lot. So, believing is seeing, right? You see what you want. I think in everything, but we don't have to get into that tonight, but especially in the book of Revelation. There's something about the stakes being raised here, symbolically, historically, theologically, where we want to see what we believe, which is that the world is coming to an end, that we're here to see it. I think that's a part of it, right? I mean, how interesting would it be if the world came to an end in 3012? We won't be here, so none of those predictions go that far ahead. You ever notice that? But there's something going on here, obviously, and I want us to talk about it tonight. So what's this book? The book of Revelation. First of all, it's supposedly by John. We don't know who this guy is. It is most certainly not the John of the Gospel of John. Even John is not the John of the Gospel of John. It's almost certain that other people wrote those books, except for maybe Luke. And it's virtually certain that the Apostle John did not write this book, if only because the Apostle John was martyred around 69, and this book's around 95 or 96. But there are plenty of other reasons. Well, let me just tell you a few of the other reasons. The Gospel of John is elegant Greek. This is horrible Greek. It's barely literate Greek, which leads people to think that this person spoke Aramaic or maybe Hebrew and was trying to turn it into Greek. It's bad. It's first grade Greek. And then, if you compare the Gospel of John with the book of Revelation, there are 8 words in common. 8. Usually when you're trying to determine authorship and the family of texts, there are certain stylistic elements that are going to be there, right? They're just going to be there. If you've written anything before, if you're a writer, you know that. Certain tropes appear over and over again, certain turns of phrase. In fact, sometimes you have to fight against that to try to be original. Only 8 words. All right. It is also the last book of the New Testament. Why do I say last? Well, because it barely made it in. Almost no one in the church councils wanted this book in. It was too freaking weird. They didn't know what to do with it. They're like, yeah, let's just keep that out. And that was the case until St. Augustine, the great theologian, author of the City of God and the Confessions, came along and said, it's not really about history. It's about symbolism. And because he's St. Augustine, they said, okay, interesting that right after he wrote that, the Visigoths came over the walls in Rome, like within years. Might have been handy to have the book of Revelation there to interpret it. What is it? What is this book of Revelation? Oh, and the last book of the New Testament is interesting because, as we'll see, one of the last words of this book is, if you add anything to this, you're going to hell. Genius, right? Genius. Nobody's going to come along and add to this, especially if you put it at the end of the New Testament. And I've heard that warned about from sermons and pulpits all over. So yeah, it's the last book of the New Testament. And last is a great word here. So I say something else. Anyway, what is it? It is the Apocalypsis Jesu Christu. That is the actual opening line. Apocalypse of Jesus Christ. Okay? In fact, here it is. The revelation or apocalypse of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants what must soon take place. He made it known by sending his angel to his servant John. Remember, John is John, like it is today. It could be anybody. Who testified to the word of God and to the testimony of Jesus Christ, even to all that he saw. What is an apocalypse? The Greek word here is a preposition, apo, out of, and calypsin, or calypsis, the veil. Out of the veil, to deveil, to reveal, right? One of my favorite characters in all of literature is Calypso in the Odyssey. And Odysseus, she's a goddess who lives on an island all by herself until Odysseus washes up. Calypso, she's hidden. Nobody knows where she is. She's a goddess, but she's hidden. Calypso, the hidden, Odysseus finds her. Do you remember what happened when Odysseus goes back after seeing the hidden? He unleashes hell. Right? Unleashes hell. An apocalypse. Right? So apocalypse means to unveil, to lift the lid off, to take the skin off, maybe. It's bad. It means that there's no hope for the future. So there's no program we can institute. There's nothing coming that's going to help us. There's no person who's coming to help us except after or in the apocalypse. It's a mystery, so it's deliberately unclear. This is from the text. Then I turned to see, this is John, then I turned to see whose voice it was that spoke to me, and on turning, I saw 7 golden lampstands. And in the midst of the lampstands, I saw one like the Son of Man, clothed with a long robe and with a golden sash across his chest. His head and hair were white as wool, white as snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze, refined as in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of many waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars, and from his mouth came a sharp, 2-edged sword, and his face was like the sun shining with full force. What do you do when you encounter that? I don't know if you were here for the last course on world religions, but we learned that when you encounter the sacred, it is not fun. It is just like this. It is overwhelming and terrifying. John, again, when I saw him, I fell at last at his feet as though dead. But he placed his right hand on me, saying, "Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last, and the living one. I was dead, and see, I am alive forever and ever. I have the keys of death and Hades. Now write what you have seen, what is, and what is to take place after this. As for the mystery of the 7 stars that you saw in my right hand, and the 7 golden lampstands, here's what they mean. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches." So it's a mystery, but Jesus gives you clues at the beginning. Say, okay, so this is going to be like this. He does not do that all the way through. Right? So it's almost like a key that he's providing at the beginning. So when you see something golden and light, think something good. When you see something like stars, again, light, those are angels of the 7 churches. 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. All right. Of course, if you've read the book of Revelation, you know that it gets really bad fairly quickly. So around chapter 4, things start going to hell. Again, literally. I forget the order. There's 7 seals and 7 trumpets and 7 bowls, and they're like nested. And when the 7th trumpet sounds, it opens up a whole new can of horrible and horror. And that becomes the trumpets or whatever, and then the bowls, and then it's just absolute horror. Just plagues and rivers of blood and mowing people down. It's incredibly gory. That's one of the reasons the church fathers did not like it. It's one of the reasons people don't like it today. I always wanted to say to people who are against violence in television, because they're often big fans of the book of Revelation, like, dude, have you read the book of Revelation? It makes The Wire look like Sunday school, right? It's bad. Tina Pippin, one of the great scholars on the book of Revelation, says the drama is both intimate and global. So right, it's great spectacle. It's like bad stage craft, it's like, really, this dude, cut it with the lights, it's too much, and the explosions, it's just too much. It's really bad. Meaning that it's not artistic, and it's incredibly hard to process. Like I said, Tina Pippin says, it is both intimate and global. And I think that's a really good description of the book of Revelation, because you can read an apocalypse, you can read about the end of the world, and it seems distant, right? It's in time or space, but not the book of Revelation, because it's about you if you're a sinner, and it's about you if you're a believer. It's all about you. So strap on and lock in. Timothy Beale, whose book Religion and Its Monsters, I really like. It says this: the book of Revelation looks like the skin of the world is cracking and peeling away, opening an abyss just below the surface that teems with monsters who rise up against God and God's righteous ones in a bloody final battle of political and cosmic proportions. Oh, that language we know, right? Monsters being set loose from the chasms of the earth, the pits of the earth. We know that. Tim Beale again, Religion and Its Monsters. It is a writing of the unimaginable, combining a series of mutually incompatible elements, images, and sounds in such a way that one simply cannot compose a picture. That's exactly right if you've read this book. You cannot put it in a whole image. It's always breaking apart with blood coming out of it. In the mind or on paper, it does not leave anything out. Well, you can't do that without leaving anything out. It's a revelation of something that defies its own revelation. Genius. It's a revelation, an apocalypse of something that defies its own understanding. It's just too much. It's overwhelming. The parts add up to more than any comprehensible whole. As much cosmic devastation and human suffering is being meted out by God and by God's angels as by God's monstrous opponents. In chapter 14, for example, two angels appear with sharp sickles, swinging them across the earth, throwing the victims into the, quote, winepress of the wrath of God, unquote, treading their bodies so that blood flowed from the winepress as high as the horse's bridle for a distance of about 200 miles. And in chapter 16, 7 angels pour out 7 bowls of wrath on the earth, causing great human suffering and death, as well as ecological disaster. There is a happy ending. After all this gore and bloodshed, the literal destruction of the earth, we hear this: the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them. They will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away. Apocalypse. It must start over. There's no hope for this world. All right, so let's zoom out a little bit from the blood and the mud and the beer and see what's going on here, maybe just in context, and then we'll talk about larger meanings. First of all, this is clearly a Christian writing this, but I think a pretty new Christian. And like all Christians in the first century, and the second, and the third, and the fourth, and the 21st, they're the victims of failed promise. Especially Jewish Christians, especially the first Christians, who were told quite clearly that this is the Messiah. And they know what Messiah means. Messiah means anointed one, literally, but what's the anointed one do? He sets up the kingdom of God. That means the current kingdom is gone. That promise failed. And let's not mince words here. Jesus said in, I think it was Mark, they were at the temple and his disciples were with him and other people, and he said, you see this temple? There will come a time when no stone will rest on top of another. That happened to be true in 66 through 70 with the Roman Jewish War. He also said, there are some of you standing here now who will not taste death before you see the kingdom of God. You're standing here now. So understand the context of the book of Revelation. It's supposedly written from the Isle of Patmos, which is just off the coast of Turkey, southern Turkey, in Asia Minor, which was the center of Christianity at that time. Paul's churches were growing, and Paul was getting letters, and people were saying, hey, Jesus said we weren't going to die before he came back, and we got people dying. What does this mean? It's a shattering of the Christian worldview that Jesus did not return to set up the kingdom. As if that were not enough, you have the bloodiest period in the history of the Roman Empire. That begins with Nero, whom you probably know, and goes up through Domitian at the time of this writing. It's a time when they decided, the Roman emperors decided that they'd have enough of this weird new cult. And they thought it was a cult because these Christians, they met in secret in people's homes. They didn't go to temple like the Jews did. If you're in the temple, I run the temple. I can run you. If you're meeting in someone's house, and what's this with eating flesh and drinking blood? Are you cannibals? Why are you practicing cannibalism in Rome? I mean, it was wrong, so it was like, look, explain it to me, maybe I'll be into it. Yeah, of course, that's Eucharist, right? The flesh of Christ and the blood of Christ that they celebrated when they met. So this is bad. And plus, the Roman emperors were batshit crazy at this time. I mean, they were just, it was Nero who decided that he should be worshipped. And then that followed with Vespasian and Titus and Domitian. Of course, now Nero died in 66. He died. And so, how could this be about Nero? We'll explain that later. His ghost was still around. People didn't think he really died because he was so horrific, right? You know when Freddy's dead? And it's like, is he really dead? No, of course he's not really dead, because remember from lecture 2, the monster always returns. There was also a temple cult, so it wasn't that the Roman emperors Nero through Domitian said, hey, it'd be really cool if you worshipped me. It's Rome, so they're going to force you to do that. They created a temple cult, basically an emperor religion, where they were to be worshipped. How do you think that would go down with a monotheistic people under occupation? Not well. There was, of course, the Pax Romana at this time, so there's this deep sense of irony that it's the Roman peace all over the Roman Empire, except within the Roman Empire, with its others, especially Jews and especially Christians. And then the other context for this book, this strange book, is that it is Jewish apocalyptic literature. I say it's Jewish apocalyptic literature because the metaphors and symbols are Jewish. The language is Jewish. I don't know if you remember a verse I read a moment ago about, I saw one like the Son of Man. That's right out of the book of Daniel. Right out of it. And a lot of these stock images are out of other apocalypses. Are there other apocalypses? Dozens. Dozens of apocalypses running around at this time. And it starts way back with, actually, Zoroastrianism. But we'll get to that in a minute. So, chapter 12, verse 1. A great portent appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant, crying out in birth pains, in the agony of giving birth. Oh, how'd she get in there? She's everywhere. Then another portent appeared in heaven, a great red dragon, with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail swept 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. Then the dragon stood before the woman who was about to bear a child, so that he might devour her child as soon as it was born. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was snatched away and taken to God and his throne. The woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she can be nourished for 1,260 days. Who is this woman? Well, I think you probably know. I mean, you recognize the symbols, right? They're all symbols of goodness and light. There's a birth about to happen, perfect metaphor for apocalypse, something new's coming, which means that the old is destroyed. She's clothed in the sun. This is a positive cosmic image. Jesus in the book of Revelation often has a face like the sun, and some of the angels. Obviously, she's some kind of royalty. The 12 stars are the 12 tribes of Israel. Again, this is a Jewish person writing this, would probably identify himself as Jewish rather than Christian. Right, so she's both the divine order of creation and Israel, God's holy people, as against Rome. She's giving birth to this person on earth, where it's dangerous. And this child that she gives birth to will rule, how? With goodness and light? No, with an iron rod. Ah, man, this is good apocalypse, right? You're gonna kick some Roman ass, aren't you? I am so sick of the Romans. They've been horrible. Now, you can almost feel it. It's almost visceral. This is, of course, a dangerous moment, though. The child has just been born. She has to be taken away. She is royalty, creation, Israel, God's kingdom, and a child will rule. Who's this dragon? We know dragons, don't we? We've seen dragons in Hesiod and Enuma Elish. It's a chaos monster, right? Like at the beginning of the Theogony, or throughout the Enuma Elish, this monster represents chaos. Dragons always do. Well, often do. He threatens. What does a monster do? What does a chaos monster do? Brings chaos to order. Threatens order. He's the personification of not just cosmic horror and danger, but political horror and danger. He is marked politically as Rome. I love this image. His tail sweeps down a third of the stars in the sky. I love that. Wonderful image. He's red, as you see in the painting there. Which represents blood, of course. And later, he will spend 1,000 years in the pit. We remember the pit, right? There's always a pit. From Theogony or Enuma Elish, there's always a pit. That's where you keep your monsters, right? In fact, that's how you restore order. You put the monster in the pit. But now the monster's loose, so it's danger. Interesting that Jesus is not really the hero of the book of Revelation. It's other characters like Michael. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought back, and the dragon was thrown down in this battle. The text says, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world, he was thrown down to earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Okay, something interesting happened there. The devil and Satan. Okay, Jews did not know of a devil. Their only knowledge of Satan was as a kind of general term for accuser. That's what the name literally means, accuser. So in the book of Job, when it Satan and God are having this bet, Satan just accuses Job of following God for no good reason. He doesn't have special powers. He has to ask God for permission to mess with Job. But the devil and Satan now joined, and connected to a chaos monster that is serpentine. Now, as Beale says in his book, the book of Revelation is a manual for monster making. Or this is kind of monster recombining is what's happening here. So the word dragon here in Greek is translated dragon from the Hebrew tani, which is Leviathan. Leviathan. I don't know if you remember Leviathan from the Hebrew Bible, but we're actually talking about him next week. Leviathan's an interesting creature. If you've read the book of Job, you know that God uses Leviathan in his answer to Job at the end. He says, hey, Job, do you know what creators know? I know you have a complaint against me for all the suffering you've gone through, but were you there when I created Leviathan? Were you there? So Leviathan is dangerous and huge and even monstrous, but it's tamed. No longer. John makes him the devil and Satan. There's this monster mash. That's just for you, Charlie. There's a monster mash up. So we know dragons, these hybrid. Remember, the monstrous is hybrid. It's not ordered. It's combined with different things. So what's a snake flying for? Which is what a dragon is. You either be on the ground or you fly in the air. You can't do both. That's almost right out of the book of Leviticus, by the way. Right? You got to keep things in order, or there will be disorder. I would love for this John guy to watch Game of Thrones. He'd freak out. So Tannin becomes Drakon, or Ho-Ophis Ho-Archaeos, the ancient serpent. You see what he did there? He took this dragon and put him all the way back in the Garden of Eden. Genius, right? Oh, we know this dragon. This dragon was there in the garden. And you and I, we know this dragon too, right? Because dragons are put out on that liminal edge because they're monsters. But out there on that liminal edge is also the feminine, right? And in fact, if you look at the mythology of the world, outside of Western mythology, you will most likely find women and snakes together because they belong together. Because woman is life and snakes are life. Snakes shed their skin and keep going. What better symbol do you need for eternal, or at least very long, life than a snake shedding its skin? Well, you can get another one, actually. A snake eating its tail. Eternity, right? Women and snakes belong together. They belong together in the world's religions, and they belong together for very basic symbolic and mythological reasons. So what's going on when a creation story inverts that and says that women and snakes equal death? I'd say the writer of that story and the people who believe that story might have a problem with women and snakes, right? Ho-Ophis Ho-Archaeos, the ancient serpent that was a symbol of life. And all over the world was a symbol of life until now. Well, until Genesis, where it takes it. We saw, when we talk about monsters, she and them. Monsters are them, they're the other. And the other is also she. Right? We saw that replayed in the Theogony and Numa Elish and other texts. But now we have a new monster. The devil and Satan, that ancient serpent. So the line is now connected. from apocalypse to creation. Well, yeah, that's your perspective. Creation, apocalypse. Pretty smart, actually, symbolically. All right, let's finish up. Chapter 13. I saw a beast rising out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. And on its horns were 10 diadems, crowns. And on its heads were blasphemous names. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. Hybridity, right? Not good. And the dragon that gave its power and his throne, great authority. One of the heads seemed to have received a death blow. Remember Nero? Remember the Nero ghost? Seemed to have received a death blow, but its mortal wound had been healed. There were a lot of rumors going around Christendom then, such as it was, that Nero was alive and living somewhere, I forget. In amazement, the whole earth followed the beast. They worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who's like the beast, and who can fight against him?" And then one of the 7 angels who had 7 bowls came to me and said, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great whore, who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication. And with the wine of whose fornication the inhabitants of the earth have become drunk." So he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her fornication. Really, John? You're going there? And on her forehead was written a name, a mystery, another mystery. Babylon the Great, mother of whores and the earth's abomination. And I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses to Jesus. Why is she called Babylon? Because it was Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon who took captive the southern kingdom in 586 BCE. By the rivers of Babylon, there we wept and we remembered Zion. Right? It was the most devastating event in the history of Judaism to that point. Little did they know more was to come. It is to base a religion and a culture on a promised land and a promised offspring, and to be ripped from that land and taken to Babylon, which is basically Baghdad. It's Mesopotamia. Again, shattered religious vision. Shattered. What do you do? What does it mean? I thought this was a homeland. So now, 6 centuries later, when we're feeling the same oppression from Rome, you are Babylon. You are Babylon. This book comes right out of that tradition of apocalypse, of not just that the end of the world has come, but the end of the world has come because of this thing, Babylon, Rome. There's another example from the Seleucids, who came after Alexander died, and one of the Seleucid procurators went he was a real jerk, Antiochus Epiphanes. He went into the temple and slaughtered a pig and spread the blood on the Torah scrolls. It's just it's rage. This book is about rage. It's about the rage of desecration. So, Judaism and its oppressors, yes, you are Babylon. Christianity and Rome, again, terrible relationship until 313. When Constantine, a Roman general, wins a battle because he saw a cross in the air, and he calls one of his soldiers over and says, "Dude, what's that cross about?" The guy happened to be a Christian. He said, "Oh, Jesus loves us, died for us, lives again." Constantine's like, "Cool, I'm in." And he wins the battle. Now, I'm not being purposely flippant there, because Constantine was kind of flippant about it. He's like, "All right, cool, I won. Christianity is now the official religion of Rome." He does not seem to be especially devout. He seems to want to use this as for political gain. All right. So imagine this now. You're Jewish or you're Christian, which is hard to tell the difference at this point. And you've got this apocalyptic tradition from Daniel and Babylon, from Antiochus, and now Rome. And you're like, "I hate Rome so much." Except in 313, Rome is now us. Oh. Rome is the official religion of this empire? Perhaps that was a bit harsh. It's a real problem to live with this apocalyptic sense and you become an us instead of a them. Really interesting problem. All right, let's wrap this up. I mentioned the imperial cult, the Nero-Domitian line of persecution from Rome. Oh, the mark of the beast, right. The mark of the beast, okay, you probably know about this. So this guy who is this Antichrist is, although that word is not used there, he has a name, and his name has a number. Mystery, right? We love this. And the number of his name is 666. Oh my God! Open the floodgates, right? So now we can make Frank's name into 666 if we wanted to. But basically, if you use letters for numbers, like Hebrew and Greek does, then every word has a numerical value and every number has a linguistic value. Well, just look out. I mean, it's going to be wild, as you know. Best guess is that this is actually Nero. So if you write out Nero in Greek, or the dative form of Nero, it does in fact equal 666. There are other possibilities. Actually, scholars think this might have been on Roman coinage at the time, because if you read the book, it begins with these letters to 7 churches, and they are pretty harsh themselves. And there are lines in there about having commerce with, it doesn't say Rome, it says the beast or something like that, about these Christians having commerce with the empire. And that will get you thrown into the pit of hell. So, okay, what are you supposed to do? Well, you can't buy and sell, right? So it's possible that the number is coinage. Some scholars think that, and perhaps there was Nero's imprint on there too. We don't know. All right. After Revelation, what do we do now? Apocalypse now. Well, Apocalypse emerges with its gods and monsters when there's a sense of imminent catastrophe. Okay? When there's no hope for the present, you call down the gods and monsters. You loose them from their pit. We know the story. It's a recreation. It's a new beginning. It's a new theogony. It's a new Enuma Elish. Because this world is too corrupt. There's no hope. We've got to burn it down. Of course, let's not forget Apocalypse, ironic. I was doing some research and I found the Lego apocalypse. I don't know if you can read the line underneath, the 2 people being thrown into the lake of fire, the 2 Legos. Anyone whose name was not found written in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire. There is also This is from Six Flags. The Apocalypse Ride. Apocalypse, the last stand. Explosions, plane crashes, zombies. This can't be good, but in this case, it's what's mind-blowingly fun. Apocalypse is a record-setting stand-up roller coaster that will give you the chance to show what you're made of when everything around you is blowing up. You'll be strapped in, fully standing for this soaring blast through chaos. Right away, you'll feel how standing adds smoothness. Smoothness, because that's what you want in chaos. A little smoothness. And to an intimidating journey through the most pummeling thrills a wrecked world has to offer. We love Apocalypse. Yeah, Jared.
So Josephus.
Yeah.
Approximately 37 to 100 CE.
Really interesting cat.
Kind of a turncoat.
Yep.
Verse mystic or a Jewish elder.
He was Jewish and ended up working for the Romans.
And from what I understand, rewriting and writing a lot of what ultimately entered the Bible. Yeah.
Yeah, he's the best source for that period, the time of Jesus.
It feels to me, just from what I've read about him and the framework you've created here, that his fingerprints might be on this somewhere.
Oh, I hadn't thought of Josephus. Yeah, they said Josephus that's a great idea, except Josephus is a better writer. This guy's a hack. You know, but I'm glad you brought that up, because you know who some other options are? John the Baptist. Now, this sounds like John the Baptist, right? The guy who baptized Jesus, who just stood out by the river screaming at people. That's this guy. This guy is not fun. He's pretty much a jerk, you know. All he wants is vengeance. In fact, that line, "Vengeance is mine," I think comes from here. And do you know that song in the Battle Hymn of the Republic? Now I can't remember the song. Where the grapes of wrath are tread, that Steinbeck picked up. That's right out of this book. The grapes of wrath. Where what comes out of them is blood. From the death. Somebody, as people are wont to do with this book, calculated the deaths, the body count in the book of Revelation, 5 billion.